let's start with definition. What kind of animal is the European Union? Is it an empire? At first blush, you might think it's an empire because it has a critical feature of empires, which is a large multi-ethnic and multilingual community under one roof. A typical trait of empire. But of course, it isn't an empire because there's no imperial center that rules over the rest. And, for instance, right now would keep Britain from seceding, as Madrid will keep Barcelona from seceding. So is it a nation state? No way. Nation state meaning something based on blood, culture, and language. No way. It's a linguistic mishmash, as you know, with sovereignty lodged in the various capitals, which is the important thing. So then maybe third, is it a willed nation? Willed nation like Switzerland and the United States. Kind of e pluribus unum. Let's take a closer look at the idea of the willed state. And let's start with Switzerland. Here we have Switzerland consisting of several linguistic communities that came together under a single roof in the 14th century. And its founding myth is the Rütli Oath that tells it all as it is rendered thus by poetic license. I'm going to go into poetry now. We want to be a single people of brethren, never to part in danger nor distress. We want to be free as our fathers were, and rather die than live in slavery. A few centuries later, this will be echoed by the most famous slogan of the American Revolution, ascribed to Patrick Henry. You all know it: give me liberty or give me death. Both Switzerland and the US were founded by an act of will. They did not arise from primordial national communities. And they are nourished by a common sense of history and destiny. Let's look at these two willed nations. Well, originally, of course, you might argue, wait a minute, the U.S. did start out as a WASP republic, white Anglo-Saxon English, as a copy of Protestant Britain. And it was peopled by Britons, based on the mother country's laws and institutions. Yet this new country, and that's where this willed nation idea comes in, soon turned into a multi-ethnic, multi-religious state based on hallowed documents, such as the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Gettysburg Address. Anybody, whatever his belief or bloodline, can sign on to them and become an American. So nationhood in America is not ethnic or religious, it's creedal. The creedal part is not an ecclesiastical, but a secular one. And so an early French observer, Hector St. John de Crèvecoeur, noticed a strange mixture of blood: English, Scots, Irish, French, Dutch, and Germans. Who then, he asked, is an American? He answered, quote, he has left behind all his ancient prejudices and manners, receives new ones from the new mode of life he has embraced, the new government he obeys. The American is a new man and acts on new principles, unquote. So this new man, like a Swiss counterpart, lives in a willed nation, to repeat, or what in German is nicely called Staatsnation as opposed to Nationalstaat. The state, as it were, makes the nation. So what now, back to the European Union? What's the European Union? It's neither one nor the other. It's neither willed nor a classic nation state, but suspended somewhere in between. And that has been its problem since its birth 65 years ago. Why? Let me explain. The EU did not spring from a single act of will, like the Rütli Oath or the Declaration of Independence. It is a work in progress with many stations. From the founding of the European Steel and Coal Community in 1952 to the European Union in 1993. It consists of many nations with sovereignty, to repeat, lodged in the various capitals. So each member state has its own history, own identity, and language. They do not claim a common destiny as Americans and Swiss did. And my point is that the sum of the parts is larger than the whole. There is no we the people, no demos to fall back on ancient Greek. Now, Harvard political scientist Stanley Hoffman, from whom I learned half of what I know about IR and the other half came from Ken Walton, put it as follows. Europe, in spite of its impressive record of functional integration, still remains a collection of largely self-encased nation-states. If the hostilities entailed by their separate pasts appear to have evaporated, the hostilities have evaporated, Europe's separate pasts have not. The point about this quote is that he wrote this almost 40 years ago. And yet, I think the diagnosis still stands today. European integration has proceeded by leaps and bounds, as you know, expanding from 6 to 28. But it is not neither nation state nor empire nor world nation. So how should we call this sui generis, or how would this sui generis turn into an e pluribus unum like the United States or Switzerland? There's still 28, soon to be 27 separate histories and cultures, and almost as many languages. And the focus of loyalty is not on Brussels, but remains on Berlin, Paris, and Warsaw. And these capitals are also the true centers of power. Now, if Euroland has a common language, it is English with an American accent. It's not French, it's not German, it's not Esperanto. And I think the same goes for mass culture. If you look around, not to put too fine a point on it, Europe dresses, listens, dances, watches, and eats America. Happily wolfing down, Kentucky Fried Chicken and McDonald's. Or not so happy. More important, political debate unfolds at home. This is critical. I just talked about pop culture, but now the political culture. Political debate unfolds at home, not in the European Parliament, nor in European-wide media. Basically, Europeans read and watch their own, or they subscribe to Netflix or the Financial Times. This is interesting. These are not European things, Netflix, Financial Times, or what have you. So given that, how would Europe gestate into a kind of United States or Switzerland, resting on a common will and a common destiny? Now, those of you who know the history of integration would at this point raise the argument, wait a minute, Europe did once have a common sense of history, which had emerged from the horrors of World War II, and was translated into the pledge, never again war, never bloodshed, never carnage. So Europe was to be a different kind of empire, quote unquote, an empire of peace, not like Rome or Britain. But that reservoir, the sense of a common history and destiny, has long been depleted because the heirs of the founders, Adenauer, Schumann, and Monet, no longer remember the cataclysm of World War II. So 70 years later, peace is not a gift as it was then, but a given. It's been discounted, it's been priced in. So back then, the very young went off to the Franco-German border, tearing down barriers, to breaking them down, and to celebrate the transcendence of the nation state. Until very recently, the EU took for granted Schengen land, passport-free travel from Portugal to Poland, but now border controls are back. Back, as you know, in response to the flow of refugees and migrants from the Middle East and North Africa. So to put it to put the whole thing that I'm trying to tell you in a nutshell, Germans and French look to Mrs. Merkel and Monsieur Macron and to their national parliaments, and not to Jean-Claude Juncker, the president of the EU, nor to Strasbourg, the European Parliament. Now, to put it in larger terms, the European project is bouncing up against its limits. Think about the following metaphors. The beginning European integration was like, going up, mountain climbers going up the foothills. Very easy, very nice. Eventually, then they hit the harsh, steep cliffs of the Alps. And of course, the most dramatic blow is Brexit, turning seemingly endless expansion into secession. That's point one. Point two, the endless crisis over the euro warns that Europe may have gone one bridge too far on the march to quote-unquote ever closer union by placing nations into a single monetary straitjacket that doesn't fit each and all. Third point, the de facto suspension of Schengen land suggests that in the crunch, nations will obey not the call of community but sovereignty. Now let us not put the problem in real conceptual terms. The EU's founding documents, like the Treaty on the Coal and Steel Community, lack the emotional punch of the Declaration of Independence, with its, quote, self-evident truths and the right and duty to throw off the yoke of absolute despotism. Nor do Europe's founding documents duplicate the sacral nature of this mythical, by the way, Swiss Ridley Covenant. What was the faith when they started building Europe? The operative faith was functionalism. Meaning, if you integrate sector A, you soon must integrate sector B and then C and D, etc. Starting with coal and steel, which were the wherewithal of war making. If you have that, you have to have free trade. If you have to have free trade, you have to have unified regulations. If you have those, you need a European Court of Justice. And then you go to common taxation, and bingo, suddenly the nation state is but a shell of itself. That was the faith of the 50s. It reflected the faith in administrative inevitability. It was, if you wish, integration on the sly, not by a lofty act of will underwritten by popular affirmation, as was the US Constitution. And as it deepened, functionalism, from coal to currency, to repeat, was destined to creep ever closer to the core of national sovereignty and sharpen the contradictions, as Karl Marx would have it. So as it expanded and deepened and encompassed more and more sectors subject to integration, what didn't happen, that the mainstays of the classical nation state, obligation, identity, did not grow at the same pace. Nor did European-wide political participation expand in the absence of a demos, people. And hence you get the populist revolt did not start last year, with the influx of refugees. The populist revolt broke out in 2005, that's quite a while ago, when the French voted no on a European constitution, and followed by the good pro-European Dutch 1 year later. So, and the constitution, as a result, was shelved and replaced by the so-called Lisbon Treaty that shifted power back to the states as represented by the European Council. But that didn't solve the problem. By now, it solved the problem. The revolt kind of was dampened in 2005, 2006 in those two countries. But by now, you have almost all member states have anti-European populist, what have you, parties in parliament. In France, as you know, Marine Le Pen pocketed 35% of the presidential vote, last one. And in Germany, the most virtuous and most Europeanist country, right-wing populists have entered parliament for the first time since the Third Reich. So my prediction is that the populist revolt on the right and on the left that gave us Brexit will not soon subside. And I think the handwriting is going to stay on the wall. Why? Because the central problems, if you want to talk about nation building, the central problem stems from Europe as an elite and bureaucratic project. That collides with the claims of domestic mass participation. It's a bloodless, it's an unemotional venture that works very nicely, delivers tons of benefits, but it's not powerful enough to generate an e pluribus unum. And add that the various national elites are at loggerheads with each other over the course and purpose of the Union. So if you compare on one hand Germany and its civil religion of Europeanism, not only with Britain, where the revolt won, but also with the resurgent nationalism among the new EU members in Eastern Europe. Now, Brexit is an obvious case in point. The referendum last year spelled secession no matter what the costs. And they are now beginning to trickle in as they're trying to reach some kind of agreement between the Brits and the EU. Right now the EU wants 60 billion euros as a kind of exit fee from the Brits. They voted for Brexit no matter what the costs, which tells you something about don't do referendums. You get the same kind of mishegas as here in California too. Warsaw. Then you go east, and you go to Warsaw and to Budapest. They love the subsidies. They really love the subsidies, but they hate giving up sovereignty. And so there's a different kind of nationalist revolt washing up against the EU. And remember that Sweden, one of the most virtuous nations on earth, moral superpower, was the first member to close its to reinstall border controls against unwanted immigration. You keep going. There's what I call Club Med. Club Med is those Euro countries of the southern tier. Portugal, Spain, France, Italy, Greece, all on the Mediterranean. They have been railing against this German diktat on fiscal discipline and painful reforms to improve competitiveness for years. Berlin, on the other hand, markets its love of Europe most loudly, but then bridles against integrationist ventures that would dilute monetary discipline under the euro and increase Germany's liability for the debts of the West. And so, to bring this back into the recent past, my argument is that Chancellor Merkel will go slow on President Macron's ideas on centralization and debt sharing. So now more contradictions. To make the point a different way, the Germans, of course, try to mold the EU in their own image, as you know, great powers or the strongest power of any system are wont to do, if ever so softly, by deploying their economic club. The French, we talked before about different past, different histories, different traditions. The French, with their much more statist culture, seek to impose their own ways. So, following in the footsteps of his predecessors, Sarkozy and Hollande, Macron wants a common investment budget for the Eurozone, a common finance minister, and a banking union. In other words, he would like to get France's hands on the community's resources in order to alleviate fiscal constraints at home and reformist pressures, which the Germans have been pushing. So this is an old struggle. The ancient struggle between dirigisme and more competitive markets reflect separate histories and different social contracts. And if that is the case, then the struggle will not subside anytime soon in a European construction where the nation state keeps having the last word. Getting closer. So having told the tale, at the end, let me give you the moral of this tale. I think it should not come as a surprise. Why not? Well, the nation state has proven the sturdiest political institution of the last 500 years. And longevity obviously reflects functionality and good health. So having started out with, so think about the amazing triumph of the nation state after World War II. The UN started out with 50 members. It now has 193 states as members. That tells you, this simple statistic tells you that the nation state is by no means dead or dying or tumbling. So willed nations like Switzerland and the United States remain the exception. And while Europe is far from becoming one because its members are obviously evidently unwilling to give up their sovereignties and identities. Now, in conclusion, what's the future of this European Union? And we go back to the question in the beginning. What kind of animal is it? Neither empire, nor nation state, nor like that. So, my pitch is that Europe is sui generis. We haven't seen anything like it in modern or not so modern history. It certainly can't be a nation state, not with its separate histories and cultures, nor is it destined to turn into a willed nation that sets aside the past on the march to ever more perfect union. So what then? What do we get? What's this animal like? And I came up with an appropriate biological metaphor. I want to liken the European creature to a coral reef. Why? This organism obeys no stringent design, but it lives and it spreads. It is built by myriad microscopic animals. It doesn't have a telos or a foreordained destiny. Some parts break off, others grow again, and new branches sprout every which way. So to complete this analogy, by applying it to the EU, unless hammered by an outside force or dissolved by contaminated waters, coral reefs are virtually indestructible. Brexit or not, it's a safe bet that the European reef will endure as well.